This morning, our title for the session is Visual Faith, Christianity and Visual Art. We're very pleased to have Christina Carnes Ananias with us, who's currently a doctoral student in the Divinity Schools program, the Duke Initiatives in Theology and Art. And she is interested in doing her research on the intersection of systemic theology and modernist visual art. But lest you think she only cares about recent art, for more than the past decade, she was teaching art history courses at Charleston Southern University. She's interested in Chalcedonian Christology, late modern philosophy, and French modernist paintings. And to make it even more precise, her dissertation is on the topics of truthful imaging in the paintings of modernists through the icons of the Christology of Theodore the Studite and the ordinary language philosophy of Ludwig Wittgenstein. So we're in for a visual treat. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nelson. That makes me sound very accomplished. So I really appreciate that.
You are.
Yeah. So I was telling Nelson before we got started that I've got kind of a new talk for you guys today, and I haven't timed it perfectly. So, but I think that I'm going to hit somewhere like around 30 minutes or something. And then I thought after we talked for a while, we could have a conversation about a few different visual artworks. And I'm going to be asking questions throughout this presentation as well. So I hope that you guys are awake enough to participate in some discussion as well this morning. And actually, I'm going to start with a prompt that I want you to be thinking about. Think about a time when you were really, truly moved by a piece of art. So that doesn't necessarily have to be a visual artwork. That could be a movie. That could be a piece of music. That could be a homily even. But be thinking give some time when you were moved, and I'll ask you to share in a moment. I'm going to actually start by just give you guys a second to think about that, and by sharing my own. And I'll share my screen so that you can see what I'm talking about here. Let's see. Do y'all see that?
Right.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So this is a poem by Elizabeth Mowers. And I saw this a few weeks ago. It actually popped up on my Instagram, on my social media account. And
Christina, can you please just play the slide so that we can actually see it bigger? It looks very small on screen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm so
Thank you.
sorry. There you go. How's that?
A lot better.
Okay, good. Anyway, this is a poem by Elizabeth Mowers. And I saw it on my Instagram account in the evening, and I was in the middle of some kind of fresh pandemic craziness with a sick toddler, and it just gutted me. I think I cried for a solid 20 minutes, and my husband was like, I don't know what to do right now with you. But I'll go ahead and read it to you just because it's so sweet and it's short, and it'll give you a little time to think about your own artworks. Mostly what I feel is so tired, ragged really, and so ready for this phase to be over. It's just that every so often, briefly, I feel this whooshing in my ears, and the threads of time are fraying at my fingers. And I think of the last day that you will ever say, Mama, I'm a kitten, and curl up into my lap and fall asleep. And I cry a little for that future me. And I cry a little for right now me, holding the weight of glory with such tired arms. And now I want to cry again because it's so moving. But yeah, so now now that you know a little bit about me, I want to hear a little bit more about you guys. I'll open it up. What are some artworks that have moved you all? Feel free to just jump in.
This is Kelly.
Yeah.
I think one of the most poignant artworks I saw was actually a group artwork that was when the AIDS quilts were laid out on the mall in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And walking among them was just, you know, so devastating. And it reminds me kind of now of during these pandemic times where various outlets, the New York Times, PBS NewsHour, many other places, take a moment to highlight individuals that have passed away, you know, ordinary people, but that were so important in the lives of those around them. And that's what the AIDS quilts were, right? They were a depiction of that individual's life and their contribution that was gone. And so to me, those quilts were just amazing. And you know, they're still around. And there's it's a whole thing. There's like this huge collection of those quilts. And so and at the time I was really into quilting, so that was part of it too. But yeah, that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was a really, really amazing project. Remind me, was there a quilt for every person?
Well, the idea is that family members or friends would make a quilt to commemorate the person they had lost. And so it was up to, you know, it wasn't some other making the quilt, it was, you know, the people around them. So there was a lot of quilts.
Yeah, I've seen images of that. And what I love about that is it takes sort of intangible numbers that feel kind of theoretical, and it shows the way that these are actual people that take up space in the world that are now gone. Like the quilts took up space, so much space on the mall.
Yeah.
And now you could see like the vastness, the hugeness of their loss.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good, thank you. I'll have to remember that for the future. Yeah, and I love that it's a collaborative art project too. It's not just one person who's putting all of this together.
Yeah, and you know, just staying on the mall there for a moment. The first time I went through the Vietnam Memorial was also quite impactful and served the purpose it was meant to serve, which was to show you the impact of the loss of all those lives. So
yes. That's Maya Lin. I love that. It almost, you know, that's an abstract, somewhat modernist artwork as well. And it just does its job. Like you said, it just does its job so beautifully. It cuts into the ground of our nation's capital with all of these beautiful names carved in. So thank you for that. Thanks for drawing our attention to that. Anyone else want to share?
I'll share just an auditory moment. The first time in concert that I heard the piece "When David Heard," and I was just absolutely transfixed. I could walk to the box seat that I was sitting in Benaroya Hall in Seattle when I was listening to it. It was just so moving, and yeah, that was a piece of art that has since then really marked my life.
That is That is a really, really beautiful setting. Are you talking about the choral setting? I think it's by
Yes.
Eric Whitaker.
I think it is Eric Whitaker, and it just goes on and on and on, where David is crying for my son, my son, my son, my son, my son, after he had heard that Absalom had died.
Oh, Whitaker is one of my favorite composers. And again,
Anything by him is fabulous.
everything, seriously. When I sang in choirs almost my entire life, and we did a few of those pieces. We never did that piece in particular, but we did some pieces of Eric Whitaker's. And to sing in a choir that's doing those is also a very moving experience, to hear your voice join with the voices of others. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was going to share a piece of music as well, although I don't have a specific title for it or an author or a composer, but when I hear this Russian liturgical music, I'm totally transfixed. It's a style and a voice that is just, it's just surreal. I mean, it just sort of stands in a place of its own, and I really enjoyed listening to it, and it just lifts me in a very deep way.
It's Russian liturgical music.
Right.
Yeah. So that's probably a kind of music that's played in Orthodox churches, do you think,
Yeah.
primarily?
Yeah, and Rachmaninoff has composed a few pieces that are in that repertoire, I know, but
That's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that up, because we're actually going to be talking for a while today about another liturgical practice in Orthodox churches, which is iconography. And I think that iconography reflects visually a lot of those same kind of otherworldly, ethereal principles that are at work in that kind of music.
very good. Thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else? We could probably do this forever.
My wife has been a professional artist, so I probably spent above average time looking at paintings in museums, and above average number of thick art history books in the house, which I haven't had time to read, but I guess partly reminded by Lynn's comment earlier, while I haven't seen it in person, the images that I've seen of Hieronymus Bosch's work is, I think recently I've heard the word otherworldly.
Yeah.
It can look very reminiscent of current science fiction depictions of things, and then you learn it was painted in the 1400s and go, wow.
Yes. That painter had quite the imagination, for sure. He was able to come up with some really kooky characters that fill our imagination when it comes to thinking about the next life, for sure. Anyone else? Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Now that I know a little bit more about y'all and where you're coming from, I'm going to tell you a little bit about just one approach. I think there are a lot of ways that we can approach modernist visual art theologically, but I think there's one way that works particularly well for the time that we're in right now, which is Lent. And this is a way to think about modernist art that helps us understand maybe the brokenness of the world a little bit better, and meditate on that brokenness, and meditate on and maybe grieve a little bit also for that brokenness. So let's hop right in. And I'm going to start actually with something we're maybe a little bit more familiar with, which is the Bible. Let's see if I can get on the next slide here. There we go. In Colossians 1, Paul says that Christ is the image of the invisible God. Now, this verse and others like it forms the basis for a practice that we were talking about earlier, iconography. And I bet at least some of you are familiar with it. If you aren't familiar, iconography is a special type of Christian art. The earliest icons were created in the first centuries of Christian history, but the practice really exploded as a liturgical phenomenon in Byzantium. And that's why we still get these beautiful practices in Orthodox churches. So they have been understood, these images have been understood as windows to the divine. Let's see if I can pull up an image here. There's one. And we're going to talk about that contrast here in a second. So in the 8th century, actually, a big conflict exploded about whether it was fitting to use images like this in Christian worship. And I bet that you can all imagine some of the protests that might have happened, the way that theological thinkers, Christians, were maybe protesting against the use of images. But the defenders of icons went back to this verse in Colossians and another one like it in John 14, where Jesus says, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father, to say that a portrait of Jesus is a portrait of God. The ordinary humanity of Jesus, in other words, can show us God. And I lost my, yeah. So we could talk a lot more about the theology and the Christology, and maybe we will eventually in our Q&A session. But the main thing I want us to look at when we look at icons is the artistic technique that is used. And I'm going to call this kind of a stripping down or a simplifying. And I see this really well in contrast. You can see this really well in contrast to the era that came right before it. It's pretty striking. So the Greco-Roman world really valued perfect proportions and realistic renderings. They're realistic in as much as idealized perfect human bodies can be called realistic. They were just the masters of this. But the Christian artists in Byzantium didn't choose to go with this style. They created this simplified or stripped down style of iconography instead. Now, some people might understand this as a stepping backwards as in visual art history. It's so simple. It looks like it doesn't take quite as much mastery to do. So I want to open it up for your answers to this question. Why do you think that Christian artists went backwards in this way? Do you have any ideas about why they might have chosen to do a more simplified style?
Maybe something that reflects more of our Christian ethos and beliefs than just a deifying of the human body, as it were.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love the way that you brought in the deifying of the human body, because that's exactly what was happening in Greco-Roman culture. It wasn't just here's a perfect body, but it was this deifying, this making of making perfect of humanity to reflect the perfection of the gods. And Christianity saw that and they thought, surely there's a better way to represent the kind of God that we worship. And so, like this word that we have been throwing around this morning, they wanted to create an artworks that were a little more otherworldly, that brought you into a spiritual realm, rather than grounding you in a perfection of what's earthly. Great, thank you so much for that answer. They're trying to demonstrate a spiritual truth rather than an earthly truth. So here's a quote actually from another theologian that I really love. Her name is Natalie Carnes, no relation to me. But in her words, she calls this stripping down or this simplification an apophatic reserve. They're reserving their ability to perfectly portray a human being for apophatic purposes. Now, apophatic is just a fancy way of saying stuff we don't know. So they are reserving their ability to perfectly render a human person to show we don't know everything about God. We don't know everything about the spiritual realm. And therefore, it sparks our imagination a little bit more. She says this, it's a word of silence, this simplification. It's a word of silence, a negation of its own visual form that is built into an icon's pictorial rhetoric. So the dissimilarity appropriately reflects what this icon theologian, I think with a lot, Theodore the Studite, calls the mystery of the invisible made visible in Christ and all persons. That reflects our verse that we were looking at the very beginning. Christ makes visible the invisible God. He's the image of the invisible God. But this apophatic reserve isn't just telling us what we can't know about persons or about Jesus or about God. It's also telling us it's reminding us of the abundance of what there is to know about God. It opens up this reserve of mystery that has been shown to us in the person of Jesus Christ. So it opens up the possibility of remembering what we do know about Jesus, what the scriptures tell us about Jesus, what the church has told us about Jesus, and to imagine and visualize what we don't yet know. So that's kind of what Bosch is doing in his paintings. He's imagining what we don't yet know to open up his viewer's imagination for what the spiritual realm could be. We can see God in Christ. And this is actually true of all humans in terms of what we know and what we don't know. We can know other humans and we can know them really well, but we can't know them perfectly. Those of you who are married can probably testify to this. You can know someone as well as a person can ever be known, but there are ways in which that you still learn new stuff every single day. So this icon, this style of simplifying, of stripping back, it's a reminder of the possibility. It's a reminder of that mystery, that lingering mystery, and what we also do know. So to use a phrase that I'm sure you've heard before, icons use this stripping down, this simplifying technique to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. Let me explain. We recognize a lot in this icon. We recognize nose, eyes, ears, mouth. We might even see it and think, oh, that's Jesus, because he looks like representations of Jesus that we have seen before. But it's strange too, right? This doesn't look like a photograph. We don't know, and it reminds us that we don't know everything about God. He's a stranger to us in many ways. But the flesh of Christ makes him familiar. The ordinary flesh of a human person makes him familiar. Okay, so now that we've talked about icons for a while, you're probably thinking, isn't this about modernism? So let's move on to the modernist visual arts. Modernism is so many things, and don't let anyone tell you differently. There's no major big theory that can cover all of the different techniques that are going on in modernist visual art. So we're just going to focus on this one stylistic technique, this apophatic reserve, this simplifying that I think we see not only in icons, but also in modernism. Rouault's work, Georges Rouault, is a great example of this. And if you guys have been members of the chapel for a while, you might remember that they hosted an exhibition of his prints a few years back. And they were set up all around the sanctuary of the chapel there. And actually, it was really, really beautifully done within the chapel, because Rouault's work is intended to reflect the style of stained glass windows, with its thick black lines and vibrant colors and really simplified forms. So this is a modernist artist who was also a Christian. And he was using this simplified technique. Sorry, there was someone walking right by. I needed to wave to. But he was using this simplified technique to achieve that same purpose that icons were achieving, this otherworldly purpose. Here we see images of Jesus, but also images of a woman who's a refugee. And so he's reminding us of what we know and what we do not know about Jesus and about other human persons. But this is not only in Christian artwork, modernist artwork. This is also found in all kinds of modernist artwork. Here we see pictures of artworks by Gauguin, Van Gogh, Cézanne, and Mondrian. Gauguin here has a self-portrait where the background and his features also have been really simplified, pared back to show a spiritual reality. Here we see Van Gogh's mailman, and he has taken his characteristic style and brought it into this portrait. Cézanne is here on the top right, and this is a mountain scene that he has really simplified to show the majesty and to allow our imaginations to fill in the blanks of that experience of viewing the majesty of a mountain. And of course, Mondrian, who really has taken this simplifying technique to its max. This actually, he started these paintings by trying to show the very basics of what painting a tree would look like. So this was a tree at some point, but he simplified until it's just the basic primary colors and basic geometric forms. Again, making the strange familiar and the familiar very, very strange. Of course, these are atheist artists. A lot of these artists are atheists, but there's something that rings similar to icons. So in the same way that we think about, that we need to rethink about the goals of the artists when we're recognizing what the artists are doing in icons, we need to think about what the goals of the artists are when we're thinking about the simplification in modernism. Here are two ways. Of course, there are a lot of ways to think about this, but here are two, I think, main ways that we can think about the modernist artists' goals. One, they wanted to tell the truth. And two, they wanted to re-enchant the world. Let me show you what I mean here. These are two artworks by Manet and Courbet, both modernist artists that are working at the end of the 19th century, mid to end of the 19th century. We're going to focus in on Courbet's in contrast to a work that came right before it, which is called The Swing by Fragonard. He's a Rococo artist. And what we see in this image is a beautiful aristocratic woman with gorgeously rendered silky satiny dress and her perfectly soft hair in a gorgeous coiffed garden that's at the peak of spring, and she's flicking her little shoe off. And if you notice, there's also a little dude who's tucked in the corner who is either going to catch her shoe or maybe catch a glimpse of something as she throws her little leg up here. But this is perfectly characteristic of this Rococo style. And what the artist's goal was in this Rococo style was to flex their artistic muscles. They want to show off, essentially. They're showing off. And they're showing off not just to say, I'm an amazing artist. They're showing off also to make money. This was considered the best artwork of the time. This was stylistically perfect. Artists had come so far. They could render things beautifully, perfectly. You wanted to reach out and touch it. And you could imagine how her dress or how the leaves on the trees felt. But the modernists in the middle to the end of the 19th century, they said, isn't artwork about something more? Isn't there something more going on in art that we need to talk about? And Courbet said, artwork is not about showing off. It's not about making money. It's about telling the truth. So Courbet started telling the truth in his artwork. The way that he did that is he said, I don't want to paint perfectly rendered aristocratic ladies and gentlemen. I want to paint the truth of French life. So if you look to the left here, this is Courbet's painting, The Stone Breakers. And here we have an image that shows hardworking, everyday people on the side of the road, something you might have seen out of your window if you were taking the bus in France. And the man is a little bit too old to be doing the work, and the young boy is maybe a little bit too young to be doing this work. And it looks hard and it looks grueling and it's difficult. So he says, this is actually the truth about life for most of the people in France right now. Also, he's telling the truth about painting itself. You'll notice it's in a bit of a rougher style. It's not rendered perfectly like this Fragonard Rococo painting. But he's saying paintings are not photographs. Paintings are, he's telling the truth about the actual oils and brush strokes. So that's one way that I see modernist artists changing their goals. We'll talk about one more way, and then we'll move on to a few more paintings. Re-enchanting the world.
Christina, can I ask a quick question?
Please, please.
Yeah, so when you use the word modernism, could you maybe explain what you mean by that? Because, I mean, I'm not an artist. I mean, I just assumed when you said modernism, you're talking about something going on right now, but that obviously isn't the case. So.
Yes, thank you so much. That's a good reminder to clarify. Modernist visual art is typically understood to be from about 1845 to 1945. I know typically when we hear modern, we think up to date, what's happening right now. But in art historical terms, modernism is considered to be what's happened from 1845 to 1945.
Okay,
and actually the stuff that's happening right now is either called contemporary art or postmodern art.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for that question. And also, thank you for jumping in. If you guys have any kind of questions or anything, just jump on in. I appreciate that. I welcome that. So this second, we're going to jump into re-enchanting the world. This is best seen as opposed to classicism. I'm sure you guys have heard about Enlightenment, the Enlightenment. It's an intellectual movement that happened in the 18th and 19th century. And to oversimplify, the movement really thinks a lot about human rationality. It's about prizing our minds and what humans are capable of. And the artworks that were made at this time really reflect that. So here in this image, to the left, this is David's painting of Socrates right before he drinks the poison and commits suicide. So of course, Socrates is this pillar of human rationality. He's the philosopher's philosopher. And also you can see this rationality infuse the way that the painting was constructed as well. We see a lot of right angles with his arm that's up like this, and the bed is perfectly horizontal right in the middle of the composition. And even the grid on the wall behind him is perfectly constructed rationally. Now, the modernists, like Van Gogh at the end of the 19th century, rejected that. They said, it's not just what happens in the human mind. It's not just mathematics that we should be concerned about. It's the spiritual realm. It's the emotion, the life of emotions, the life of romance and of visions. So you can see what he has done here is brought his characteristic stylistic technique of those heavy brush strokes and those swirling bright colors to bring that otherworldly quality to life in this scene. Okay, so we've got two goals of modernist artists: telling the truth and re-enchanting the world, which I think can be summed up with our familiar phrase here: making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. To re-enchant the world is to say humans, landscapes, everyday objects are more than what we think they are. We're going to make the familiar strange. And to say, and to tell the truth is to make that strange, the strangeness of the world familiar. It's to remind us that we can know things. Okay. So this stripping down, or this so at this point, I'll go ahead and get into the Christology. At this point, we have a way of thinking about one technique of imaging in modernist visual art. We know a little bit of theology from our icons, and we know a little bit of art history, and we've drawn a nice parallel, but what does this get us? What good does this do for us? Now, I think there are a lot of good things that this can help us with, but I want to focus in on this one way that is reflective of the season that we're in Lent. This stripping down technique that's used in modernism is particularly good for depicting the strangeness and the familiarity of grief, brokenness, and lament in the world. I'm going to say that again. This simplification, this stripping down, is particularly good for depicting the strangeness and the familiarity of grief, brokenness, and lament in the world. Now, by thinking about modernist art in this way, the artwork might help us to better understand the plight of the suffering people in a Christological way, which might lead us to empathy, it might lead us to action, it might lead us to penitence, it might even lead us to praise. So, of course, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the image of the invisible God, is about God experiencing the fullness of these brokennesses, even unto death on a cross, and triumphing over them, healing us and the world in his victory. Now, we have a liturgical way of showing this, and I think that you guys do this at Duke Chapel. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this is called, the images that you're seeing are called the stripping of the altar. So this is a liturgical ritual that happens after the Maundy Thursday service. Do you guys do this at Duke Chapel? Yeah. Okay, so all of the liturgical utensils are taken from the altar, candlesticks, the frontal, even the outer vestments worn by the clergy, they're put away. And the cross and icons, if they're present, are veiled. They're covered up. The image of the invisible God that we see in the icon is silenced. This liturgical visual silence marks the lowest point of human existence, when the image of the invisible God, Jesus Christ, was blotted out from God's world. So when we look at our beautiful altar that is usually decked out with candlesticks and all of these beautiful things, all of that is stripped away to show us that Jesus Christ himself was stripped from the earth. And like we say in the creed, went down to the depths. Now, of course, because we're on this side of the resurrection, God's people, the church, enact this solemn service here with one eye on the empty cross, knowing that Christ is not there because he has ascended to the right hand of the Father in heaven. So how do I approach modernist visual artworks with this kind of stripping down ritual mindset? I'm going to give you a few basic questions. The first is, what is going on here? For a while, I worked with, sorry about that. For a while, I worked with kindergartners in a museum. I would guide them through the museum's artwork, and I would ask some questions. And this was the most interesting question that I ever asked. And it is amazing the kind of responses that you get from kindergartners. They can see things that adults would almost never see. And so I stole that question from the kindergartners and I brought it into every time I talk to adults about artworks too. What is going on here? It opens up all kinds of conversations. And I think that it's particularly good for modernists because we're thinking about that stripping down, that simplification. It's really easy to say simple things in a response to this simple question. Secondly, what persons, objects, and emotions are familiar in this artwork? And how do I know them? Thirdly, what is strange about these persons, objects, or emotions that I see in this artwork? What do I not know? And what makes me uneasy? And what does this leave me wanting? Lastly, what do I need to hope for in this image? Okay, so now I'm going to look at I want us to look at some examples together. Can someone give me an idea of the time? I don't know what time. I can't see the time on my computer because I'm screen sharing.
You have another 15 minutes.
Oh, awesome. Perfect. Perfect. So that'll give us 15 minutes to talk about a few artworks together using these questions. I think that could be really helpful. And I'll model that first with this painting. This is called Guernica. It's by Picasso. And this is a painting that was made for the World's Fair in 1939. It's a huge mural. Is this something that you guys have maybe seen before? Sometimes this is familiar to people.
Oh.
Yeah.
That was my second choice as far as moving pieces of art.
Yeah. What, have you seen it in person, Ken?
Yeah, at the Prado. Uh-huh.
It's amazing to see it in person because it just makes you feel so small.
Yes.
It's a really, really beautiful, big artwork. So what is going on here? Let me go ahead and ask and answer that question. Or actually, if someone is familiar with it, Ken, do you want to answer that question? What's going on here in this image? Are you familiar enough with it to feel comfortable answering that?
But Ken, before you answer that, I want to know why you had that second on your list as a moving piece of art.
Yeah, I want to hear that too.
Well, it was a reflection of, as it was explained to me, what Picasso was aiming to do to show the awful calamity of destruction of war under the dictatorship of Franco there.
Yeah.
And so I had some assistance with that too. But then and I was with one of my daughters who is an art historian.
Oh,
so
wow.
she spent some time with us in that regard too. And it was so gripping because of the chaos that it portrayed, just things being dismembered and the worst possible examples of destruction of life and all of the terror that it really brings as I look at it. So it was very moving to me that way.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Let's think about this with those questions too. What's going on here? Well, very basically, we have a war scene, just like Ken told us. Chaos, destruction. Something awful has happened here. One thing that, we could talk a lot about the different images that are present here, but one in particular that I find striking is the image of the mother with her dead child in the left-hand side of the canvas here. What is familiar to me is her cry, her lament. What is familiar to me is the eyes, nose, ears, the mouth that's gaping open in so many of these figures. What's familiar to me is this broken sword down here. What's familiar to me is the animals that are present. The bull over here, there's a bird depicted in the back, and right here at the center of the canvas is a horse. But of course, what is strange about this artwork, the things that are strange about this artwork are that it looks like a child has painted it. The faces are distorted. The colors are black and white. There's no color. It's an absence of color. The figures are kind of laid right on top of each other. There are sharp edges where it seems like maybe there shouldn't be sharp edges. And then, of course, there's the strangeness of this eyeball that's right in the center of the top with the what looks like a light bulb as well. So what I don't know and what I'm interested to learn more about is why Picasso used this technique, why Picasso has layered things like this, and why and what okay, and so this last question, what does this leave me wanting? This leaves me wanting resolution. This leaves me wanting a reason why. This leaves me wanting resurrection for that mother's child. This leaves me wanting to know, where is the home for these people now that they have been dislocated? Who will house these people? Who will put their limbs back together? Who will take that horse to his stall? Who will put all of this back together? And of course, those are questions that are best answered by the Christian gospel. Jesus Christ is the one that puts those things back together. Jesus Christ is the one who will restore and redeem not just our humanity, which praise the Lord that he does restore and redeem that, but all of creation all of the brokenness of creation will be brought back into order. So, but what this artwork in particular does, and I think a lot of artworks, is it helps freeze us in that pre-redemption moment of the destruction of the brokenness of the world, so that we can appropriately reflect and grieve, like we do in Lent, like we're supposed to do in Lent. We're supposed to take time to reflect on our sin and the sin of the world and the brokenness of the world, and ask, what does this leave me wanting? Where is my hope? So that when Easter comes, we can appropriately praise and thank God. Now, of course, Picasso, he's an atheist. He's a nihilist. But look at the ways that Jesus Christ and the gospel of Jesus Christ is big enough to have an answer even to Picasso's nihilistic painting here. To say, even Picasso, by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, by the Holy Spirit, can give us something that shows us and helps us be Christians in the world. Let's look at another one. And this one might be a little bit, let's skip over another Picasso. I had another Picasso here for us, but I want to look at another Rouault. This was in that exhibition that was at Duke Chapel a few years ago. And I'd love to hear, I actually don't know a lot about the background of these images. So we can have a really good discussion, I think, about just the surface of it. What is going on in the actual image? So yeah, so I'm going to open it up. Answer any of these questions that you want. What's going on here? Who is this?
It's Jesus suffering on the cross.
Very good. What tells us that it's Jesus? There are no answers that are too simple. This is a simple artwork. It's intended to be simple.
Cross, the halo, the male of his age.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's strange about this? We see our halo, we see that it's a male, we see that he's on the cross. What is different about this image than other images of Jesus?
There's a strange shadow in the middle of his chest. It almost looks like his heart was removed.
Oh my gosh, I've never noticed that before. Beautiful, that's right. What else? What's strange about this?
We're spared seeing any nails or any flesh wounds.
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that up. The artist has zoomed in here. And I should note, this is not a cropped image of the artwork. This is the entire artwork. So yes, Nelson, we are spared seeing the bloody nails in his hands, the bloody nails in his feet. We're also spared seeing, we see his halo, but we're spared seeing the crown of thorns that we're so used to seeing in images. Why might Rouault have made the decision to zoom in so close and to spare us those things? And there is no wrong answer here because we don't know. We can't ask him. So why might he have done that?
Well, I would say so that we don't focus on those, to take our gaze away from those, so that then we focus on the centrality, if you will, of Christ. I also see, and maybe this is part of the artist's style in other paintings and stuff, but there's a lot of disproportion here.
Yes.
The head is too small, the neck is too big, the torso is very skinny. And like I said, I don't know if that's just part of the artist's style or if that's intentional for what's going on here.
Right. I think that's a beautiful observation. I think in particular, if you look at like his armpit area too, that looks like it's overdone a little bit, like it's overstretched or something. So yes. There's a lot of disproportion. And his head, like you said, it looks too small for his body on this big neck. He looks incredibly uncomfortable.
Yes.
It looks like he's twisted and contorted. And I think one thing that I should let you guys know too, is that this image is very large. So when you look at it in person, his torso and face are the same size as your own torso and face. And if it's hung the right way, you're confronted heart to heart, face to face, eyes to eyes with this image. So in that way, when you see this distortion, at least when I saw this in person at Duke Chapel, I found myself kind of trying to mimic, and it felt so uncomfortable. So that makes me think, if he doesn't show the nails and he doesn't show the bloodiness of the cross, he's still showing us the incredible weight of sin and suffering and shame that is on this human body, by showing us how contorted and odd and uncomfortable it is. And we can almost feel that in our own body. I see that also in like what you mentioned with the darkness on his chest, and you can see his rib cage. You can almost tell that he's suffocating under this weight. You could imagine him gasping for breath and seeing that rib cage try to expand and not be able to. What else? What's this leave you wanting?
I guess some aspects of the pose aren't all that more angular than what we see in some of the icons. And I guess sort of tangential to your question, today is the first time when you made passing mention of icons being controversial.
Yeah.
I guess all icons include some gold, but particularly by the one that you showed us having so much of a gold background, I immediately thought of the golden calf. And is this an idol or is it an icon? Both 4-letter words.
Yeah. That is, and you put your finger on the heart of the controversy that happened in the 8th century, and it happened in the Protestant Reformation again, and it's still going on from time to time. Are these artworks, if they're used in worship, are they used as icons or are they used as idols? Can they be used as idols? I would argue that any image has a tendency to be used as either an icon or an idol. You can use it either way. It depends on your approach to the artwork, especially in worship. But you're exactly right. Also, when it comes to looking at this image, it has a lot of those same exact stylistic techniques that an icon does. It has an otherworldly quality. But you're right, what it's lacking is that golden background. The golden background in icons is often used to show the heavenly realm, to imagine the kingdom of God in all of its splendor. A lot of icons are written of Jesus, who has already entered into splendor, or the saints who have already died and entered into splendor. But here we don't see a glorified, perfected Jesus. We see a Jesus in the midst of dying and pain, and he's not in the heavenly realm. So we don't have that gold, but we do have a halo. But I love the way that Rouault has given us a halo in black and white. You know, it's a halo that shows us that Jesus was human. Now, what does this leave you wanting? Does this leave you with any questions? Does this leave you feeling an emotional pull towards one thing or another? Does it make you feel sad? Does it make you feel hopeful? How does it make you feel? And what does it leave you wanting?
Well, I'm struck by the expression on the face, which actually is no expression on the face. It looks a little sad, but it doesn't look agonized or in pain as some depictions of the crucifixion do.
Yeah.
And going back to the Picasso, with the gaping mouth, excuse me, with the gaping mouth or something, this face looks almost restful, but tinged with sadness. And so I guess, there's a, I can't think of the word, not discrepancy, but there's a, you've got the suffering of the body, but yet there's this restfulness or almost peacefulness or resignation on the face.
Discordance, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Right. I think that that's exactly right. And it makes me think of Jesus in the garden the night before he was crucified, where he says, if possible, take this cup away from me, but your will be done, not mine. So in this, his face reflects the peace of knowing that he is doing the will of God. But there's also, like you said, it's tinged. He is human. There is deep sadness there. So it shows both of those things, I think, beautifully. Really well done. Well, I think we've got maybe a little bit more time. Does anyone want to offer a final observation or a final question about this artwork?
One thing that I see, Christina, and I notice this with a lot of iconography, is the things that are out of proportion are sometimes maybe a hint from the icon writer that this is what you are to focus on, and this is where another deeper meaning is. The chest and forearms and underarms are disproportioned here. If you can just look at that, I see something very similar to a butterfly or wings.
Oh, Carl, that's beautiful. Yeah.
And this is the how we know how a butterfly is formed, the chrysalis, which is a tomb, looks like a tomb. And that looks to the first time a child or someone sees a chrysalis, you don't think that that's anything alive or anything that has any hope.
Right.
And then a few days later, you get something much more beautiful and vibrant and kinetic and alive than what you had before.
Mm.
Maybe that's the 2020 hindsight of Christianity, but that's if you just hold up your hands and cover everything but that, it's very, very similar to a butterfly or some sort of wings.
I have never seen that before. Thank you for drawing our attention to that. And I think one of my favorite ways of talking about this 2020 vision that Christians now have post-resurrection is a theologian named Alan Lewis talks about it as stereophonic. In one ear, we're walking alongside the disciples in a Holy Week and feeling the tragedy of this, of God with us dying. But in the other ear, we're hearing the resounding hope of the butterfly that has come out of the tomb, that he has risen. It's stereophonic. So when we look and when you guys walk through together as a congregation, when you walk through Holy Week, I hope that you hear both the hope of the resurrection and the grief of lament that happened in Holy Week. So think about the tomb and think about the butterfly that's coming. Thank you, Carl. Nelson, I think that we have hit time. Should we wrap up?
As we did in the real world, sometimes people vote with their feet, vote with their screens, and linger for more discussion. While everyone is still with us, it's our opportunity to unmute and express thanks to our leader today.
Thank you so much.
Yay.
Beautiful talk.
Thank you. So great to be with you all. It was such a privilege.
Thank you.
We appreciate you making time in your busy schedule to share all of these insights with us.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. It's so great to be with you all. And I saw the list of all of the different people who have been presenting, and what a list. It's a privilege to be a part of this series. So I have to run and get to my own church service, but thank you again. And I hope you all have a great rest of Lent, a sacred Lent, and that the peace of Christ stays with you all.
And also
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to log off. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Next week, you'd like to come back. Many of you